Bonnie Erickson's name may not ring a bell for you, but if you're a fan of the Muppets or Major League Baseball, her creations have surely made you smile. Throughout her career, she's had some pretty big hits, but like anybody else in the world of sports, she's had some flops too. Reporter Noam Osband has the story.
Bonnie Erickson grew up in Minnesota with dreams of working on Broadway. So, after finishing college, she moved to New York City.
I worked in costuming for about 7.5 years, always wanting to be a designer.
But life took her in an unexpected direction.
I got involved with puppetry, really, through Jim Henson. I heard from a friend that he was looking for a costume designer for one of his projects, doing the costumes for Frog Prince.
They call me Sir Robin, the Brave.
Sir Robin the Brave? That's kind of a weird name for a frog, isn't it, fella?
It was 1970, and Jim Henson was also working on a new TV show called Sesame Street. As his studio got more work, he needed more staff.
Jim asked if I would stay on and run the shop.
Bonnie ended up running the shop for 7 years, keeping projects on deadline and making sure everyone had the supplies they needed. But also,
I learned how to make puppets during that time.
Bonnie also learned how to develop her puppets as fully formed characters, as personalities with a backstory. You probably know her work. Miss Piggy? Bonnie designed her. And Waldorf and Statler, the two old hecklers in the balcony?
Well, I've seen a lot of versions of Robin Hood, but none to match this one.
How's that?
The others were all good.
Bonnie made them, too. But although she was enjoying great success in Henson's workshop, it wasn't enough.
Jim knew that I had always wanted to have a business of my own. He said, we just won't lose touch. And surprisingly enough, we didn't. He became one of our first clients.
Bonnie and her husband, Wade Harrison, worked out of their apartment in Brooklyn Heights. They made lots of puppets for TV commercials. And in 1978, they got a new kind of assignment. It started when the Philadelphia Phillies approached Jim Henson and asked if he could design a new team mascot.
And Jim said, no, I'm not doing that kind of thing, but Bonnie Erickson is the person you should talk to. So Jim, thank you. And we started meetings with the Phillies.
What was your relationship to sports?
Well, my relationship to sports was pretty minimal.
The Phillies already had two mascots, a brother and sister pair named Phil and Phyllis.
They were colonial figures that were really not very performable.
The costumes had huge, cumbersome heads, and that made it hard to be active.
And I think I wanted to make a shape that was going to have its own sort of character so that if you put a performer or a human being in it, it was going to be funny just because of the way it moved.
And so Bonnie started creating a brand new team mascot. She got inspiration from the Phillies marketing department.
They had a slogan, which was be a Philly Phanatic. I took that as wanting to have a megaphone, so that's where the snout for the Phanatic came from.
The Phanatic was green, large, pear-shaped, and wore a Phillies jersey.
And on the back, we wanted to give him a sort of logo of his own, so we gave him a 5-pointed star.
Like she had done at Jim Henson's studio, Bonnie created a whole personality, complete with its own biography. He
evolved in the Galapagos and became this enormous baseball fan because we figured who could contest that. This seemed to be the perfect background for a character that nobody could describe. It's a purely fantasy animal.
Finally, on April 25th, 1978, the Phanatic was ready for his debut.
Yes, it was a beautiful day. It was a sunny day. I have no idea whether the team won or not. I hope they did.
For the record, the Phillies beat the Cubs 7-0.
Everybody decided to just let him appear, not to make any big announcement. This was the Phillies fans. You weren't going to force them into anything. And so he just sort of appeared. He came on the field. The costume looked clean, bright, and got a lot of laughs. And it's the laughs you're waiting for. So all in all, that first day was a big success.
When did you realize the Phanatic was going to become huge?
We went into a pop-up store, and I am totally surrounded by Philly Phanatic product.
A lot of these products were Bonnie's own design.
It was enormously satisfying to stand in the middle of all this stuff.
It was also pretty lucrative. Before the Phanatic debuted, Bonnie and Wade had offered to sell the copyright to the Phillies for $1,300. The team turned down the offer.
Once they saw how successful it was and how popular it was, then they chose to buy the copyright from us. Cost them more.
$248,700 more, to be precise. The Phanatic quickly became one of the most popular mascots in sports. In 2011, Forbes magazine called it America's favorite mascot. However, not all of Bonnie and Wade's mascots were such big hits. Not at all.
Oh, boy. Dandy. We were approached by the Yankees, which surprised me because even though I'm not a big sports fan, I knew that they were pretty traditional. I was excited about the fact that the Yankees, our hometown team, was interested in having a mascot. And my thinking at the time was to do something very traditional.
Like the Phanatic, Dandy was large and pear-shaped.
He was a dyed-in-the-wool Yankee, which meant that we did fur fabric that alternated white with blue stripes. And he had a big hat that spun around on the top of his head. He had a red handlebar mustache, and looked very much like a turn-of-the-century kind of baseball player.
Dandy's design needed approval from one of the most feared owners in all of sports, George Steinbrenner. Bonnie didn't know much about him.
Wade knew, but he wasn't going to tell me how intimidating George Steinbrenner could be, I think.
Wade and Bonnie headed up to Yankee Stadium to meet the boss.
He seemed to like the sketch, but he said that the blue was not dark enough. And I said, well, if we're doing product, it shouldn't really be that dark because it's not going to be that appealing. So we had, right off the bat, we had an argument going. We did resolve it. We did finally hit on the right color. But I have to say, when I came out of the meeting, the people in George's office who had been sitting in the back part of the room during the conversation said, we don't really think anybody's ever contradicted George.
Dandy was snake-bitten from the get-go. On July 10th, 1979, weeks before Dandy was to debut, the Yankees played an away game in Seattle. The Mariners were about to host the All-Star game, and they'd hired a mascot associated with another team, the San Diego Chicken. The Chicken was just a few years older than the Phanatic, and with its bright, colorful feathers, the mascot had become nationally famous. Kids and fans loved the Chicken. Sadly, Yankees outfielder Lou Piniella did not. While the Chicken was placing a hex on Yankees pitcher Ron Guidry, Piniella chased after the mascot, cursing and ultimately throwing his own glove at it.
George Steinbrenner was also furious, and his comment at that time was, those things don't belong on the field. Well, George, in about 2 weeks, you're going to be introducing your own character. And what does this mean?
It meant Dandy wouldn't receive team support, but no one told that to Bonnie and Wade.
We came to the introduction of the character, and we sat in George's booth, and we never saw the character at all. Not through the entire game, we never saw the character. So that was sort of an indication that this was not going to be something they supported or that they were going to promote.
It got worse. Not long after Dandy's introduction, Yankees captain and beloved icon, Thurman Munson, died in a plane crash.
Since we had introduced the character around the same time, there was a confusion about whether this character was inspired by him.
The problem was Dandy kind of did resemble Munson.
He had that same kind of turn-of-the-century look with a handlebar mustache, and often it's been mistakenly thought that I was trying to do a Thurman Munson character.
Dandy was relegated to the stands and left to fend for himself.
In the upper decks, it could be pretty volatile sometimes, so we were concerned for the safety of the character. So I think they didn't want to provide someone to accompany the performer, which we thought was paramount.
After several years, Dandy's contract expired.
We decided not to renew, and I think they were just as happy not to as well. It was disappointing to find that the character didn't take off the way we had hoped it would, but it was just, it's... Everybody fails. You don't hit it every time.
That story came from reporter Noam Osband. Bonnie Erickson and her husband Wade continue to design some of the most recognizable mascots in sports, including the Montreal Expo's beloved Youppi, the Kansas City Chiefs' KC Wolf, and several others. We'll have photos of her with her creations at onlyagame.org.